for joining us, as our funding partners are well connected and very well informed. They've been in the space for a very long time, and so you all are in for a treat today. And so I will begin by introducing them by sharing a little bit about their backgrounds. Both organizations have supported NAPE in the future and in the past and in the present. And so without further ado, Michelle Walker Moak believes in dedicating herself to meaningful work. As a community affairs manager for Applied Materials, Inc., she oversees strategic grant making for the company's North America locations outside of their Silicon Valley headquarters, resulting in more than 100 community partners. Michelle also manages global employee giving and volunteer grant programs with approximately $5 million donated to nonprofits annually. Based in Austin, Texas, she enjoys frequenting live music venues when she's not shuttling her team to school activities. Michelle is a graduate of Leadership Austin, a current board member for Mind Pop. Past awards include Grant Professional Association of Austin's Giving Star Award, Book Spring Storybook Heroes Award, Austin Under 40 nominee for Community Relations, United Way's Young Leader Society Leader of the Year, and Austin AFP's, which is Association for Fundraising Professionals, Community Affairs Executive of the Year. Thank you, Michelle, for joining us. And you also have Michael Mandala from Toyota. Michael has been with Toyota since 1999. He has held leadership positions in legal services, retail market development, sales and marketing, learning and development, and equity, diversity, and inclusion. Currently from Toyota North America's headquarters in Plano, Texas. We have Texans here for y'all today. He is responsible for the Toyota USA Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit public benefit corporation. Since 1987, the foundation supports innovative direct service STEM education programs through projects across the US. The foundation aims to provide access to education pathways that can transform the lives of young people by providing the in-demand skills needed for in-demand careers. Michael has a BA from the University of California, Los Angeles, and an MBA from the Peter F. Drucker School Graduate of Management at Claremont Graduate University. He serves as director of the California State University Dominguez Hills Philanthropic Foundation, a member of the advisory board for the Drucker School of Management, and a member of the steering committee for the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas's Inclusive Economy Accelerator Advance Together. Michael is married and resides in North Texas. He and his wife have 2 children, and in his free time, he enjoys outdoor activities like hiking, tennis, and Camp Gladiator. So as I mentioned, we will be hearing directly from both Michelle and Michael on their organization's giving priorities and what they hold dear, and also how they are supporting equity and inclusion work in their respective responsibilities. And so I believe I'll start with Michelle, perhaps, to go ahead and do a quick introduction of her organization, and I'll take a moment to share her slides. One moment, please.
All right, thank you, Brittany. So Brittany's going to put a few slides up. She mentioned I'm Michelle Walker Moak. I am with Applied Materials. We are a tech company based in Silicon Valley, but we also have a very large manufacturing site in Austin, Texas, which is where I reside. And I've been with the company now for 25 years, so it's been a long road, but I'm very, very fortunate to do this kind of work. So, and I've been doing community, I think, for the past 18 years. So with the Applied Materials Foundation, we established the foundation in the early 90s just to ensure that we could keep our giving and our commitment to the community consistent regardless of the business environment. And so we have an open grant making process, and we provide grant funds in locations where we have a business presence. And we fund in a couple of different areas, pre-K through 12 education in those locations, as well as arts and culture. We also fund in environmental work and basic needs. And then our 5th area, which I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about today, is our Generation Girl initiative. We established this initiative about 5 years ago when we came together to talk about what we could do to really make an impact in terms of workforce and help girls enter the STEM fields. So if you can go to the next slide. When we started looking at the issue of diversity and inclusion, it's quite a big subject topic at most companies now. And we definitely believe in diverse teams. We think they're essential in driving innovation in the company. And that's pretty much what our company is based on, is innovation. And we understand how important it is to have everyone at the table, all the voices present, and people being able to be their whole selves at work. But when we looked at the data and the research, we were seeing that although girls were getting degrees at 50% and made up 50% of the workforce and getting degrees at the same rate that their male counterparts were, very few were choosing to go into STEM fields, and even fewer were choosing to go in things like computer science or engineering. And then not only if you just looked at gender issues, but if you looked at racial makeup as well, when you looked at Black and brown girls, very, very few were choosing to go into these fields. So we started looking at what are these barriers, what are the perceived barriers, what are the actual barriers, and understood that a lot of girls were getting gender bias at a very young age. Decision-making for these fields happen at such a young age. And so we started really looking at what we could do to remove these barriers and help girls build a future that they were allowed to kind of pursue their dreams. So if you'll go to the next slide. And so that's how Generation Girl was born. It's a 5-year initiative where we were dedicating funds to help girl-serving organizations. And I wanted to spend a second here when we define the term girl. So when we use the word girl, we're actually referring to gender expansive youth, cis girls, trans girls, non-binary youth, gender non-conforming youth, gender queer youth, any girl identified youth. And we've been working with an organization called Alliance for Girls to make sure that we could be as inclusive as possible with the term Generation Girl. And so for us, even though we do have the STEM, we realize that it's really the opportunity that allows girls to build the confidence and the skills to pursue a career of their choice and allows them to break down the barriers. So if you'll go to the next slide. Our approach to this. So we worked with the National Girls Collaborative when we originally started to really look at the research before we developed the approach that we would take. And what I really like about our approach is that you do see access to STEM education and the importance and focus on STEM quite often in a lot of funding programs. However, what tends to not always go hand in hand with that is the work on confidence and leadership development for girls as well. Because what we find is that often girls are kind of their own worst enemy and they have this pursuit of perfection. And oftentimes I don't know how many times I've heard a young girl say, I'm bad at math. I'm really bad at it, I can't do it. So they're not always opting in to the tougher or harder math classes because of this kind of pursuit of perfection. So we realized at a very young age that we had to start talking about and creating this confidence level for girls in the area of STEM so that they felt confident to raise their hand, join a class where they might be the only girl in the room for robotics or whatever it may be. So again, confidence it's kind of key for us to kind of focus on confidence and leadership, increasing access to quality STEM programs. And then the third one is actually supporting the girl serving sector at a whole through capacity building grants. For us, when we really started looking at it, although STEM seems to be funded, the girl serving sector itself is not something that a lot of philanthropists are funding or focusing on. So although it's a discussion point from a workforce development standpoint in a lot of STEM fields, actually funding in this as a philanthropy space isn't an area or sector that's been well cultivated and well supported with funding. So for us, we wanted to add in that capacity building piece so that as we're looking at this 5-year initiative, are we building the capacity within these nonprofit partners? If you'll go to the next slide. I do want to talk a bit about the data behind the partnership. So we partner with girl-serving nonprofit organizations in locations where Applied Materials has a business presence. And we work with all of the nonprofits, and we built out metrics based on self-efficacy and STEM STEM competencies, as well as capacity building. And coming through that since 2018, we've actually been able to touch about 25,000 girls. And I think when you're looking at that data, those are just touch point data. But what I'm really excited to show is actually, are we moving the needle in terms of increasing self-confidence? And so we can actually say through pre and post test with all of our grantees, when we're rolling all those data points up, we're actually seeing that 83% increase their self-confidence by participating in the programs. 73% felt that they grew their STEM competencies. 84% said that they actually were interested in pursuing a post-secondary degree. And the other piece is who we're reaching. And for us, it's really important to make sure that the STEM access piece is really getting to girls that may not have access to high quality programs. So nearly 70% of our girls identify as Black, Latinx, or Native American. And 64% of the girls are from low income households. So I love this data point, these data points. It allows us to go back to our board to come in and talk about how we're accomplishing what we're accomplishing with the Generation Girl Initiative, so that we can ask for funding, right? To keep funding this type of work and these types of nonprofits in our community. And so being a technology company, we have a lot of engineers that work for us. The data piece is really, really important. But I also understand for us, we didn't want to put too much of a burden on the nonprofits. So we really worked with the nonprofits to tell us what data they were already collecting. And that built our data metrics from what the nonprofits were already collecting. And then we were able to kind of roll that into an overall data program for us as well. And I think we have one last slide. This is a list of all of our Generation Girl organizations. So you can see we're kind of spread out all over the country. This is where we have business presence. The larger locations are in Silicon Valley, where our corporate headquarters are. I mentioned we have a very large manufacturing site in Austin, Texas, but we also have sites in Kalispell and Portland and Gloucester and Albany. And so what I've been so pleased about is all of these organizations that we've been funding year after year, we have brought together to create a community of practice with these girl serving organizations. And what's grown from this is just bringing all these groups together. They're really the experts in the room. We just convene, right? They share best practices. They talk about ways to improve services to girls and ways to improve evaluation, programming, giving voice to youth, all types of things. And we share those through these community practice meetings that we host every other month for these grantees. So, which has been kind of one of the things that I don't know we saw as being such a light coming out of this work. I think we knew that the funding would be important and we knew that the data would be important, but really seeing what's come out of the community of practice has been really rewarding for us. So I probably took up way more than my 5 minutes, but that's all I have, and I look forward to having questions later.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm sure you gave people a lot of the details they were looking for about what you all are doing, and your grantee organizations especially, I imagine would be helpful. And now I will give Michael a moment to introduce the work that Toyota is doing. So Michael.
Thank you, Brittany, and thank you, Michelle, for that overview. Amazing work that you're doing and fantastic outcomes. And I was stunned at how our thinking way is similar in how we can support under-resourced youth in particular, girls and women. So thank you for that. Am I able to share? And if
I believe so.
Okay. I'm gonna have to try to figure that out because I'm not, we use Teams. Oh, here, share screen. I think I can figure this out.
I made you co-host, so you should be able to share pretty easily.
Share screen. Okay. How do I know that I'm sharing? And what am I sharing?
It should pop up with a window of all of your options. And then you just click on your PowerPoint screen, and we will yell and scream and celebrate when we see your PowerPoint.
Share screen. Oh, here we go. Okay.
There you go. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right. Thanks for your patience. So I'm Michael Medaglia. I'm with Toyota and Toyota USA Foundation. Social innovation, you can think of social innovation as Toyota's CSR organization. Our corporate giving goes through social innovation as well as our foundation giving. This is also where our dealer match program lives and our team member engagement and team member match program lives. It's also where our equity, diversity, and inclusion work live. We also have a mobility function. These are professionals that are working on things like last mile problem, first mile problem, because what we found in our work is that those types of problems are common in communities where we do our work. So we created a team within our division that helps solve those first mile and last mile problems. So that's how I'd like you to think about social innovation. At a really high level, I'm going to share our vision, mission, and a little bit of our strategy. So our vision is limitless possibilities for all. And how we intend to get there is by expanding access to opportunities and creating a culture that embraces diversity and inclusion to strengthen communities and our business. So like Michelle had mentioned, most of our work is in communities where our team members live and work, and Toyota directly employs 39,000 people across the United States, along 11 manufacturing centers and some additional financial services centers and field sales offices. This is what we call our core 4 funding priorities. So addressing disparities in communities is one of them. The second one is how can we help create a diverse workforce pipeline and diverse talent? For us, the industry, the sector, for the nation. And then a couple internal sort of dimensions to our funding priorities is how can we help the company and the sector transition to a mobility company? And then how can we help create, at Toyota, create an inclusive company culture? And so when we think about grant making, we really think hard about how does this potential grant support one or more of these funding priorities. Just drilling down on each of them a little bit. So disparities in communities, for us, it's all about access to education, access so that they can access in-demand career opportunities. And we have a particular focus on the underserved and under-resourced communities where we have a large operating presence. We also want to take this holistic view and think about some fundamental services that are required for a community to thrive. Things like transportation, which I'd mentioned. Other things can be helping to address food insecurity, helping to address housing insecurity, helping to address the digital divide. All of those things are important and highly correlated with any successful education intervention. And that I already mentioned the mobility services and opportunities, last mile and first mile problems. Drilling down on the second is how can we improve workforce readiness in our operating communities? We want to be able to attract and hire diverse talent that mirrors the population. We want diversity of talent in all levels of the organization that mirrors the population. And we want to retain. So we think about that whole talent development pipeline. We partner with some important stakeholders at Toyota, in particular, human resources. Transition to a mobility company. So we're trying to, in our work of supporting communities, what can be proof of concept and eventually create new types of service models that can serve the community and even the company in the future as we try to think about mobility as a service, whether it's moving across the room or moving across town or moving across country. One of our big ideas is how can we help people with disabilities in this capacity. And then inclusive company culture, we want to work with our executives to drive inclusion into our Toyota culture. We want to increase awareness of what inclusion looks like at Toyota and how all team members can demonstrate it. We've developed a scorecard for our executives that's tied to compensation. And we're really trying to move the needle on equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we're proud how we performed in this year's Diversity Inc. Standings. And I think that's it for now. This is a long presentation, and I wanted to try to keep it a little short and sweet. And if there's any questions that come up, I'm happy to respond. Thank you, Brittany.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, I will go ahead and spotlight us. I have a few questions that we have developed. Let me make sure I can add spotlight. And the first question is really about the vision, right? So you each talked about what your organizations are doing, kind of the mission and how you're bringing that to bear. And so I'm curious about if your organizations are successful with the ambitious goals set forth for your corporate giving strategy, what would education look like? How would STEM or CTE be enhanced or enriched? So feel free to be visionary. Paint us a picture of the beautiful world that we could live in if you all are successful with your goals.
My first instinct is to really talk about vision of having equity at the table in a really diverse environment, a diverse workforce, in all shapes and forms, so that you can truly see that and who is has a voice in the company, has a voice in innovations and moving us forward. And that everyone feels like they are being heard. So I feel like that should be reflected in our workforce, but it has to start in the education setting first. You can't say enough about most companies are moving to a very collaborative environment. We saw a lot of company culture shift quite a bit with the advent of COVID. I mean, most of us were working in office settings and cubicles, and then quickly shifted to home environments where we were learning how to use Teams and Zoom and going from one call to the next. And so I think adaptability is quite important as well. We were also struggling with, how do you keep employees engaged? How do you keep workforce engaged? And I know teachers were struggling. I'm actually married to an educator, and they were struggling to keep students engaged. I was struggling to make sure my teen was engaged in his schoolwork, right, online. So I think, we all had to learn how to be adaptive and how to shift in different environments. So I think adaptability and collaboration are key. And if we can see those things reflected in an education environment, and then move those into the workplace environment, my hope is that we can sustain it in the workplace environment and really hold up to the values that we're espousing and talking about, and make sure that we are allowing for that to happen in a workplace.
Yeah, I totally agree, Michelle. And what I liked about that is, this aspect of collaboration of K through 12, post-secondary, and what I'll call industry. How can we collaborate? We all want the same or similar things. And then for us, instead of, for us waiting at the end of the pathway and hoping that we receive the kind of young people that can fill our positions, we wanted to move upstream, work in that K through 12 space, and partner with educators and even do some capacity building with those educators if they want and need it, so that we can partner on making sure that learners, in particular in the younger learners, you know, achieve things like STEM identity, for example, STEM awareness, and get this excitement so that they have this, they intrinsically, they have this desire to pursue STEM careers. That's what we're all about, is STEM careers. And it just so happens that those are in demand right now. And I think every indication shows that it's going to remain that way. One of the many things that I like about NAPE is that the NAPE takes the systems level approach. You know, how can we define the system and then break down the system to develop countermeasures and collaborative countermeasures and collaborative ways that we can work together, because we all want learners to matriculate and be able to get a good job and achieve their version of the American dream.
Wow, that's beautiful, Michael. I definitely am aligned with both of your answers, and I'm glad that you all answered. I will give voice to the questions in the chat after we get through a couple of questions that we've had. Although Gregory Jackson's question is aligned with my next question, which is, what are the challenges in selecting grantees? There's so many people doing great work. What should members know about deal breakers or deal makers in the grant making space? What makes for a strong partner?
I think one of the things, it's very competitive and there just aren't enough resources to go around, and lots of organizations are doing great work. I think one of the things that we look for is just a systems level thinking way, right? So we may not be able to address the system, but that thinking way, I think, is going to be important to recognize that there's a system in place, and some of the things in place benefit what we're trying to do, and other things provide headwinds in what we're trying to do. And the recognition and the thinking way that there's a system, and then, you know, breaking down the problem and then defining, okay, we are going to do this really well. So I would say the systems level thinking way and ability to focus.
Yeah, you can't be everything to everybody, right?
Correct.
Michelle, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I do. When I talk with people, a lot of times everyone's like, oh, that sounds like a great job, you know, instead of asking for money, you're giving money. And it is, but the truth is it's really difficult. It really is difficult because I think we care so much about the work. And you're right, there are so many organizations doing so many really amazing things, and so it's like, how do you choose? And I would say one of the hardest things you have to do is say no, and hopefully cross your fingers that you're making the right decision, that you're going with the right partnership and the right group moving forward. I think what makes it easier is to have a really defined set of strategies or guidelines in terms of what you want to accomplish. For example, with Generation Girl, what we were able to do was actually outline a whole theory of change. And when we went through the process of defining this very concrete theory of change, it became then apparent for the nonprofits to see how they could fit into that theory of change, or to really recognize that they weren't the right it wasn't the right partnership for them. So I think us being really upfront in the beginning of outlining a theory of change, outlining how we saw impact, and defining those things up front makes it a bit easier to have those conversations about if it's the right partnership. You asked the question about deal makers and deal breakers. To me, it really boils down to communication, like 100%. It's about having open lines of communication. When COVID hit, the truth was a lot of our nonprofits couldn't access the students, right? They may have been an after school program or something, and all of a sudden when they weren't going to school anymore, you know, they couldn't access the students. So many organizations were kind of left trying to figure, not only were they trying to figure out technical things, but how do we reach students? How do we keep these programs active and alive and engaged? And as a funder, I think what was important is that we understood that, and we sat down and had conversations with all of our grantees going forward and understood that we needed to make adjustments. So I think it really means having those really open lines of communications on both sides in a partnership. I mean, funders, I think I speak for all funders when I say we don't like surprises in the sense of, oh, we thought these programs were happening and now 6 months later we get a report that says nothing's happened. You know, so those are the kinds of deal breaker pieces, is just when you don't have the open lines of communication.
That's really helpful, Michelle, especially for our members, because I think sometimes the tendency is to make sure that you're not sharing bad news. But what I know from both of you and from most funders is that please share the bad news. We can figure out what to do together, but if we don't know, then we can't help. And so I'm really glad that you brought up that point, because I think that would be especially relevant for our audience. And something that you mentioned that's connected to my next question, which is progress, right? Both organizations have seen substantial progress in many areas. And so I'm curious about, sometimes there are divides between those in the field and those that are funding the work. What do you want our members to know about what you're seeing with your bird's eye view perspective? So you had a full list of people that Generation Girl supports. Michael, I know Toyota supports a ton. And so what are some things that our members might not know about the landscape right now that you can share based on what you've seen, either via metrics or conversations you have with your grant partners?
I'm thinking. There's a
I'll
lot
jump
in
in.
that one.
Yeah, there is. I'll jump in just a bit. Having done this work for the past 18 years, I think we've seen philanthropy and corporate philanthropy change quite a bit. I think when I first entered it, it was much more of, I'll just be really honest, like check writing philanthropy. Like, here's a check, go do great stuff with it. And that's kind of, and then we've seen a shift, right? Then partnerships really started developing, and we started really thinking about what more can we do besides writing the check? How can we engage employees? How can we bring all of our resources to bear? And then from there, the strategies really started to develop, where companies started to look at where synergies existed between what companies did well and what community needs were and how they could truly make an impact. And then I think we've seen it kind of morph into these impact measures, where we're looking at not only, like I said, counting numbers of people fed or number of meals served, but are we really taking people out of poverty so that they can provide food for themselves? So we're starting to look at things differently in terms of really making impact on community-based issues. And then I would say in the past 2 years, the issue of equity has really started to become at the forefront of the discussion in terms of, do you fund equity as its own kind of space, or do you look at everything with like an equity lens overlaid on top of it? And I think it's quite interesting. I think there's like some really deep discussions happening now, because I think there's a bit of tension that's happening between this like intensive impact measure driven philanthropy space and what's happening now with this discussion around trust-based philanthropy, which is just trust in the people to do the work. You know, trust they're out there, they're living it, they're in the communities that you want to serve. Give them the money and just trust that they're going to do the right thing. So I think it's we actually have these discussions quite a bit in terms of what is the right amount of impact and data piece, and what is the right amount of just understanding cultures and communities and funding the people that need it and are doing the real work in the communities.
Thank you, Michelle. And I heard a little bit of that systems level thinking Michael was talking about, right? How your metrics have kind of changed into thinking, are we actually moving the needle on the issues that we've identified as an organization? Michael, I saw you brewing. Do you have anything you want to weigh in with there?
I just want to say I really like that response, Michelle. I thought it was right on. And, you know, Toyota and the Toyota USA Foundation are on a similar journey with going from just a check writer to having a seat at the table. We feel like we have something to contribute. And sort of, you know, when I think about this collaborative work, I can't help but think about, you know, the impact to any project's budget and, you know, the somewhat invisible costs, the indirect costs of this collaboration. And as a funder, I think that we can do a better job of recognizing the indirect costs that we are asking grant seekers to do with us, because it is not fair that funders expect nonprofits to work for free. So, and we're working our way along that journey as well. This is we could talk a lot about that
You got a
question,
lot of
Brittany.
head
That
nods
was
from
a
that one, Michael. Yeah, that
that was
was
a doozy.
a hot topic
That
right
was a
there.
doozy.
Yeah, that was a doozy. I had to give one doozy. I'm going to go ahead and read one of the questions from our audience from the chat. And then now is the time for members to ask questions. So you can raise your hand, you can type it in the chat. We'll get to as many as we can. And so this question is from Angela D. Hart. Given that in public education, 80% of the teachers are white, but 51% of the students are non-white, how do you ensure that true change is happening at the student level? Or actually, I revised her question, but same thing.
Yeah, that's a big one. If I can drill down sort of locally, we have one of our active projects is with UT Dallas and Dr. Fair over at UT Dallas, who has a fantastic academic bridge program so that underrepresented and under-resourced youth can spend some time in a college campus over the summer and sort of bridge the way for their post-secondary education. And his work is just groundbreaking in my opinion. So we partnered with UTD to help with exactly that. How do we, with Dallas ISD, Dallas Independent School District, a large urban school district in South Dallas, how do we help create teachers, facilitators that look like the population that they serve? And what I found out was, just being perfectly frank, this is an expensive endeavor. If you think about cost per learner, which is just one dimension that we look at, it's expensive to do that kind of work, to do the work that needs to be done to address that question. And so we're doing that work, and the scale is just so small. I always think about scale, that we need a lot more funders to help solve this problem. I know that's not a great answer, but that's an example of a project that we're working on right now to address that important question.
So I would jump in and talk about the importance of youth voices and asking the youth directly. We did a whole session on what's called a YPAR, I believe, which is Youth Participatory Action Research, and allowing youth to actually lead the research piece, making sure that the youth have a voice in whatever metrics or measurement that you're doing. I think that's we need to listen to them. I think that's how we're going to find out if we're really moving the needle. We also funded a research project with Alliance for Girls with a research called Ready to Lead that really looked at where they asked girls around leadership skills, and they found that while Black and brown girls felt they had leadership qualities and felt that they could speak up, that they in fact did not feel empowered by teachers in the same way. And what Black and brown girls felt were leadership skills, teachers actually did not see them as leadership skills, and sometimes almost found them disruptive. So there seemed to be quite a disconnect between how girls felt the importance of participatory leadership and having a voice, and how teachers viewed that. And so for us, having that research piece and understanding where girls were coming from allowed us to say, okay, we may need to invest more in teacher training around the issue of equity and youth voices, and understanding why there's a disconnect between these two groups. So those are two examples, I think, of how we're kind of addressing those issues.
Oh, that's extremely helpful, Michelle and Michael. I appreciate you all sharing that. I see that Angela has her hand up, but I would not be me if I did not mention the fact that that is essentially one of the major things that NAPE focuses on, is making sure that educators have the capacity to see those things and to understand, hey, why is this student not speaking in my classroom? How can I cultivate a space for them to feel comfortable to show their leadership, even if it hasn't been cultivated previously in their academic career? Angela, I welcome you to ask your question if you need.
I just want to say, since I am the person who asked that question, and this is the work that I do, and while you're saying many things that I think are absolutely wonderful, I'm wondering if there is somebody like me who you're interfacing with, who has doing this work for more than, I've been doing 8.5 years, and student voice is how I started as a teacher, because they made me better, and kids are brutal. I was teaching middle school, like when they don't like something, they just tell you, right? And it's great. It's up. And so if you react to that, that is helpful. But if you don't, and that's why I was asking the first question in the first place, because education is not, it's a fix, but it's also problematic. So giving money to something that is already broken, right? And that's the issue. So I would love to talk to you more, but I don't want to suck up this meeting, but I just needed to say that, yeah, because I'm serious. I've been doing this work. I've been very good at it. I'm about to grow to the next level. And you are the kind of people that I want to talk to, but you should also want to talk to me. That's all I'll say. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, Angela. And something that I'll say to your point, Michael mentioned the work that they're doing in Dallas ISD, and I would go so far as to say that it's a great model of innovation of what corporate partnership can offer to a large school district, right? So we know education is rife with this issues, just like all of our systems are. But when you find the right partnership and you get the right voices in the room, I am amazed at what some of the outcomes have been that I've seen even here locally. I am in Dallas, Texas, so I can speak to it directly. The amount of STEM, what was the term you used earlier, Michael? STEM identity or STEM believing that they can do it. I have seen it take off here. I even have former students that are now trying to figure out how they can get to what's now known as the West Dallas STEM School. But it is a very prominent thing, but it starts with people having conversations like this one where people can understand what the issues are and how we can be creative in solving them. I see Tegman put a question here in the chat. What makes a nonprofit easy to work with, a good partner for a foundation? That's a great question, Tegman.
I'd like to echo what Michelle already said. One of the big things is communication. And the other thing that I would add to that is, kind of like a Toyota-ism, if I may, is that there are problems out there, you just haven't found them yet. And what I mean by that is that even if a program or project is going very well, we need to be fanatical about identifying ways that we can improve and get better. Because, just throwing something out there that's totally absurd, but we could have a global pandemic that may turn everything upside down. I'm not saying that could happen, but what if it did?
Exactly. Michelle, did you have anything to weigh in with there?
In addition to the communication comment, I'll also just say I really enjoyed working with nonprofits that view programming as an iterative process in terms of that they're constantly assessing, reassessing, looking at ways that they can improve, being open and honest about failures, and knowing that the failures are just room for improvement and they're not truly failures. But I like seeing that. Those are the types of programs I want to invest in, because I know somebody has their finger on the pulse and they're constantly looking at ways that they can be better, right? So those are the discussions I like to have with our grantees. Is this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, we reassessed it, these are the changes we're making for next year.
Totally
that's
agree.
great.
Super important. That whole, we call it Plan, Do, Check, Act. Carnegie Foundation, when they applied to education, they call it Plan, Do, Study, Act. Just this cycle of continuous improvement? How do we introduce that and keep that and be fanatical about it in our work?
Yeah, I heard from a funding partner once, if you've never made a mistake, then how do I know you're actually doing the work? That really sat with me, because you have to experiment, you have to innovate to really get it right and to really move the needle for some of these problems that have been in our society for eons and eons, right? And so if you're not being transparent about trying something new and experimenting and thinking through how you can go about your work in new and different and impactful ways, then you're not helping the funders, you're not helping your clients or your community. And so what I'm hearing you all say is it's okay to sometimes get it wrong if it's in service of getting it right, right? And to communicate that if you have to, which I think is really helpful for those in the audience here. I want to make sure we're getting anyone else who has questions. We have about 10 more minutes, so we have time for another couple of questions if anyone has anything they're curious about or wondering. Oh, okay, 2 questions. I'm assuming funding cycles have a beginning, middle, and end. How can nonprofits prepare for sustainability beyond initial funding? Great question, Gregory.
Yeah, that is a great question. So, I mean, practically speaking, we're in the NAPE example. We just funded NAPE for a second project. But it brings up a good point. I mean, there's no guarantee that we're going to do a third. So, I think that's critical because, one of the things we learned when we launched our West Dallas STEM School project 5 years ago is that the community became very fatigued with corporate partners and organizations parachuting into their neighborhood and saying, you need to do this, this, and this, and then they'd be gone. So we took our approach differently because of that feedback and that we got from the communities. And sustainability beyond the initial funding, that's an important question. And practically speaking, we hope that because of our grant, because of our partnership, that the organization can build capacity and get other grants from other funders that can help with that can sustain the work. Michelle, I bet you have a more eloquent response than that.
No, I was saying, I think you were talking about beginning and middle and end. I think we're great at beginnings. We're so at middles. I think we're not so great at endings. We talk all the time about what's the right way to sunset a program. And it's hard. It's really difficult. And then also, but if you don't have an ending to some programs, it doesn't leave space for the innovation or the new thing, right? I mean, like you said, there's so many different great organizations doing wonderful work. We could easily just set what we're going to fund and then fund them for the next 10 years and not look at anything new. But I think for us, understanding that you've got to kind of constantly reassess and know that there is a cycle to these things and be as best prepared as you can for that sunset conversation and be very upfront with how long the funding is there and guaranteed. And then we usually have either a discussion around moving on to fund something new or bringing in other funding opportunities. If we hear of other funders or other funding opportunities, we always try to bring those groups in and let our nonprofits know about them and become aware of them. And my hope is the work that they've done with us will help them then go off to seek other funding from others.
That's great. And that's a common thread that I've heard between the two of you. How can you leverage our gift to now secure additional funding to sustain the work? Mimi has a question, Mimi Lufkin. Evaluation of the work is always a challenge. Measuring short-term goals are not always what funders want to see. How do we build longitudinal evaluation systems that can be supported by funders and be sustained? Longitudinal studies are very expensive. So that's a great question.
Yeah, so at Toyota Foundation, we are, a good example of that, Mimi, is, again, the West Dallas STEM School project. So that was probably the project that we started about 5 years ago when we said to ourselves, we want to do our work differently. We want to move we didn't want to be just a check writer anymore. We want to do our work differently. One of the ways that it was different is that we had a 3-year planning grant where all we did was plan. We've never done that before. And we filled every minute of those 3 years with planning. We're in our first year of implementation. And why that's important is because, we built this framework of partners, the School of Education, a large urban school district, the community. We built this framework of, hey, we want to study this so that we know what works for whom and under what conditions, so that we can do it again. Because we want to do it 15 more times. When we announced Driving Possibilities in March of this year, our vision is to apply that thinking way that we learned in West Dallas 15 more times across the country. And a huge part of that is longitudinal evaluation. And boy, I learned a lot about institutional review boards and data sharing agreements and all that blocking and tackling that's important to do that kind of work. And it was not easy for me. I bet Michelle, you're better at it than I am, but it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of planning.
I would say not an expert in this area at all, but I am supportive of other groups. I know in Central Texas, we have a group called that we work with called Good Measure, and it's a group of funders like ourselves, the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, the St. David's Foundation, a few other foundations where we're helping nonprofits with program evaluation and helping with training and support work, just to give them a starting point. I am not, being in the room with some very smart people like the evaluators, I am definitely not an evaluator, but I understand the importance of it. We're also trying to bring funders together and do funder convenings to talk to funders about the importance of funding evaluations and making it part of program funds when the requests are asked. That being said, I think it's important to right size the evaluation and understand that not everything needs a 10-year longitudinal study. Not every program does. So understanding to right size what those expectations are, right sizing it with the funder themselves to know that they can't expect those types of evaluations if they're not willing to fund it. So we have those kind of deeper discussions. So I'm hoping that we're helping in that respect. We have a small, tiny staff. There's 4 of us in the foundation staff. So we're definitely not an expert. I mean, where we've really made the foray is into the work that we've done with Generation Girl, where we hired an outside evaluator to come and work with us, because I think we know that that's not our expertise. But and I think we're looking at other areas of where we need to bring in an outside evaluator to do more. Right now, on our annual grants and our other areas like we're education and environment and basic needs, we just expect an impact report at the end of the year that kind of basically gives us an overview of the project and how it went for the grant that we did the previous year.
Thank you so much. That was very informational. Michael, I'm trying to imagine you looking at the data sharing agreements and seeing all of the red tape and the pieces. It is a bear to undertake, but I'm glad that both of you all have emphasized the importance of evaluation. We just have time for one more question. So I'm just going to go with the last one that was listed here, which was from Ted One, or the most recent one, or not most recent, but the one that was immediately following, which is how do foundations learn from each other? Both Toyota and Applied Materials are very progressive. And so what other spaces do you have that are like this one where you can hear how other funders think?
Yeah, I used to go to a lot of convenings before something happened in 2020, and I always learned something important. So there's that. The other thing that I'll say is we're not good at convenings, like us convening folks outside of a project. For some reason, our board of directors is doesn't consider that a priority. And I'm happy to hear that Michelle does a lot of that work because I think it's important. Again, with the West Dallas STEM School, we learned so much from that. We were very intentional about how we can communicate with, convene, excite, and get other funders to actually give money to the project. We've never done that before. And so we were very intentional. And what that means is we had to have a robust communication strategy so that we can do some storytelling. Important to storytelling is capturing data and capturing pictures and videos so that we could do that storytelling. And then we were very intentional on creating basically a committee. We're great at creating committees of professionals that would be responsible for this. And in the West Dallas STEM School, it worked. And another important thing is that a very strong collaboration with the university's, in this case, it was SMU, development office. And essentially, I became part of their staff, and me and some others, to do that storytelling. And man, I am so pleased with our success of attracting other funders, mostly through SMU and their huge network of funders that became interested in our project and actually contributed to the project. So it was we learned a lot from that thinking way.
Okay, Michelle, you have one last word now that we're almost at time. One last thing to share.
I think I talked about the iterative process, and I think it's the same thing for us. I think we constantly have to learn to do better and keep ourselves open to learn from others. So, it's been great hearing from Michael today. I may actually reach out to you, Michael, to have a conversation. And I think we're always looking at who's on the cutting edge. Besides articles and periodicals, there are also some business organizations that we meet up with annually that folks can talk about their programming and talk about new ideas. For me, my local groups in Austin are so valuable. And so a lot of the CSR professionals know each other and talk to each other because I think we're all know that we're really working together to make our communities stronger and better. So it's kind of nice that in this space, it's not as competitive in the other areas of business, because in this space, I think people really understand that it's about the impact that we're making on our local communities.
Wow, that was a great note to end on. It's about the impact we're making on our local communities, which I know is the overall goal for both of your organizations. Thank you all so much for attending and for sharing with us your perspective, your insights, your questions. We threw some doozies in there, but you all handled them like champs, and so we appreciate you. This is my reminder to our members that this recording will be available behind the NAPE member firewall. So if you didn't catch something or you want to hear something again, this will be available to you. And also stay tuned for the NAPE survey. We are always looking for ways that we can improve, and building together is critical for our success. Like Michelle and Michael mentioned, collaboration is key. And so we are grateful that you all choose to collaborate with us, and we hope to continue supporting each of you on your journeys. Thank you all for attending. And that concludes our meeting for today. Going to stop the recording.